Cool. Okay, thank you. Small audience, and that's fine. This is a really specialist subject that very few people know that much about. Whenever you put anything about compliance on a slide deck, it's going to go, oh, God, no, I'm not doing that before lunch. So thank you for attending. I'm going to talk about digital sovereignty, data sovereignty, why it's really important to Broadcom, why we are seeing it as a huge differentiator in the market, particularly for our partners and when you're competing with American hyperscalers and now Chinese hyperscalers as well who want some market share in Europe. Please feel free to interject, really small audience. Please just shout out if you've got any questions. I'm more than happy to answer them as we go along. And I did forget my clicker, so I will have to keep walking around a little bit. So this is me. I've been at VMware, now Broadcom, 11 years. A lot of that time is with cloud providers and our cloud provider market. So you probably know we have several thousand cloud providers around the globe. Many of those are now offering sovereign services in the regions where they operate, because when they're competing with Chinese companies, American companies, it's a real differentiator for them. And it really does help them with their go-to-market strategy as well. This is particularly the case in the EU, but not just the EU. We're seeing expanse of interest on this. I'm in Australia, I was just saying a moment ago, I'm in Australia next month for 2 days doing talks about this with our partners and with our customers, because for reasons that you'll see in a moment, this is becoming quite a key concern. Okay, so start off with a little bit of a story, because I like to do a little bit of a story. This is called the Inshengo bone. It is about 20,000 years old. It's, as you can probably see, it's the fibula of a baboon, okay? And it was found in the Nile in the Congo in around 2017. And when you look at it more closely, you think, why am I talking about this? You look at it more closely, it is the first recorded example of human beings recording data. Okay? We often think about the Mesopotamians and the Greeks, creating mathematics, etc. But actually, in mid-Africa, 20,000 years BC, you can see prime numbers. If you look at this, and there's lots of papers, if you Google this, there's lots of mathematicians have done a lot of studies of what these numbers mean. But you can see patterns of prime numbers, multiples of 10, multiples of 2, etc. So it's not accidental. This is really very deliberate recording of information 20,000 years ago. And that goes on then, so we could look at this paper written in the 1600s about data analytics, theoretical, of course, about how you could use data analytics to improve business, et cetera, We saw a machine being developed in 1890 in the US to help with the census of that year in the US, very basic type of machine. We then, early 1900s, and I apologize, it's a little bit difficult to see here, magnetic tape. Huge, huge development. Everything that we use today from when we use floppy disks to using NAND modules and SSDs, all based on this technology, this magnetic technology of impulses on tape, hard disks, etc. So this is hugely important. The next one here is the RMAC 305 IBM computer, the first computer with an internal hard drive. You've got 50 24-inch platters inside this hard drive, and it could store an amazing 5 megabytes of data, okay? Now, IBM theoretically could have actually stored more than that, but nobody at IBM could figure out why anyone would ever need more than 5 megabytes of data, okay? So we then move on to this next stage, which we're all probably much more familiar with, the internet. So Tim Berners-Lee here considered the creator of the World Wide Web. He invented HTML, so you can largely blame him for what the internet has become. And this is really the birth of real data. Huge amounts of data being generated on a daily basis. TikTok. Without the internet, who would have thought of TikTok could ever exist? Taking photos of your food and posting them online, pretending that people care, because they really don't. Okay? And then, of course, without the internet, we wouldn't have the Kardashians. Okay? So this exponential growth of data, around 2018, 33 zettabytes of data were existing on this world. Okay? So a zettabyte is gigabyte, terabyte, petabyte, exabyte, zettabyte. I'm glad I got that right in front of a technical group. 2018, 33 zettabytes floating around the planet in data centers on the edge, et cetera, et cetera. This year, that's estimated to be 170 zettabytes of data. So if we use my analogy here on the slide, you've got an apple, then a football. By 2030, estimated to be 572 zettabytes of data, one of those big Zor balls that your kids get in and run on the beach in. By 2050, you'd need a ball the size of Wembley Stadium for this analogy to work. So 500,000 zettabytes of data, estimated growth. So even though we've seen this exponential growth of data for the last decade or so, actually we're not even beginning to see this true exponential growth. And here's the challenge, and this is really the point of the talk today. So European Union studies have shown that 90% of the data in the world lives in American-owned databases, data centers, okay? And 72%, approximately, different numbers for different analysts, etc., but 72% of the market share in the EU is owned by 3 companies. Now, if you think about that from a concentration of risk perspective, you have to ask some really difficult questions. How was that allowed to happen? Where 3 US-based companies, and I know, US is our friend, it's our ally, part of NATO, part of a global leader, etc. But how was that allowed to happen? And what are the risks of that going forward, particularly where we see more assertive, sometimes unpredictable behavior coming from the White House? And I'm not going to say too much because obviously he's in London today. So resulting from that, okay, significant growth of the concept of sovereign cloud. And we're going to talk largely about what really we mean by sovereign cloud, because there is no one definition of the term sovereign cloud. There is no single definition, and that means that various vendors, AWS, Google, et cetera, can play fast and loose with the term sovereign cloud, because there is no one definition. But we are seeing significant growth in this space, and these are pre-Donald Trump 2.0, and you'll see why that's relevant in a moment. But these are pre-Donald Trump 2.0 numbers around the growth. So this is Broadcom, and it's actually based on a Gartner definition of what sovereign cloud means. Okay, so sovereign cloud is the provision of a cloud service within a jurisdiction meeting data residency requirements and operational autonomy. It is intended to ensure that data and infrastructure free from control by external jurisdictions, and that's the key bit there, and protected from foreign government access. So from a Broadcom perspective, this is how we define sovereign cloud. The cloud has to be owned by a sovereign entity. So here in the UK, it has to be a UK business. There is no external business entity that has influence over it. So not a subsidiary, an independent business who are registered in the UK. And the same is true for, obviously, for France, Europe, etc. No external jurisdictional control. Now, I'm going to talk about the Cloud Act in a moment. I'm going to talk about FISA 702 and Chinese NIL legislation in a moment. And you'll see how certain laws can actually come into the UK when they're set elsewhere in the world. All the data resides within that sovereign nation. That's pretty obvious. The actual physical location of the disks, the NAND modules, whatever they might be, located in residence. 100% sovereign operations. There was an article last week, it showed up in a few different places, where in the US, Microsoft had let Chinese operators operate the DoD cloud. Yeah? Quite shocking, yes? So Microsoft thought it was okay that the DoD cloud, Department of Defense cloud, Azure, for their specialist cloud, was operated by Chinese operators. Someone thought that was okay. But our belief and our definition here is that 100% needs to be within that sovereign nation, within that jurisdiction. And of course, security, compliance, regulation, etc. Sovereignty is built on security and compliance, and I'll show you that in a moment as well. So we've kind of talked about this, but what's driving it? Geopolitical change. We are at a point in the world, at a time when things are pretty unstable in the world, in the Middle East, in Ukraine, Russia, etc. So that geopolitical tension has added to some of this uncertainty. Cyber attacks, we heard a lot about those this morning from Paul and Joe. Public cloud security, that's always been a consideration. If you do public cloud really well, then it should be secure, but people make mistakes. And when you have APIs that are public on the internet, those APIs can easily be exposed, and those errors, if you like, people make are very easily taken advantage of. We talked about increasing data volumes, increasing regulations. Almost every year, the EU has got a new regulation that's impacting us as an industry. Data Act, AI Act, EUCS is coming as well shortly, all impacting the IT industry. And then customer expectations. Everyone expects everything to be on all the time. If we want to log on to our banking on 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning, we expect it to work. And sometimes when it doesn't work, it's really, really frustrating. So customer expectations are driving this as well. And I talked about this. Let me just build this out. So sovereignty, and these are my slides. I created these concepts because they don't really exist. But from a Broadcom perspective, we see this from what a sovereign cloud is. 3 pillars holding this sovereign cloud or sovereign platform up. Security. Nothing really different around the security. If you're not using a secure cloud, you shouldn't be using it pretty much. So a secure foundation from a cloud perspective. This complicated web of compliance and regulation, and that might be industry-specific, like DORA was talked about this morning, PCI from financial services, maybe HIPAA in the US and other legislation across Europe for healthcare, for financial services, for other regulated industries. So all of that is a bit of a web that all has to fit together. And then sovereignty elements itself, which is what I spoke about a moment ago, that data residency and the authority over the data. Okay, and we'll talk in a moment more about, well, on the next slide, more about this concept of authority. So I started this session off by saying there's no real definition of sovereign cloud. This is what we believe it to be. And this has allowed people to play fast and loose with the term sovereign. And we've seen, and we will continue to see examples where Donald Trump, other US legislators are subpoenaing or creating sanctions against European organizations or other organizations in the world that impacts them. So Donald Trump, in this example here, ICC, that's the International Criminal Court, a guy called Karim Khan, who is the prosecutor for that court, was investigating potential war crimes in Gaza, as you would expect. And as a result of that, sanctions against him basically forced Microsoft to close down his Office 365 account. Okay, so the wording, I've just gone too far, sorry. The wording there, it also threatens any person, institution, or company with fines and prison if they provide Khan with financial, material, or technological support, meaning that Microsoft had to take away his technology support by the Office account. So removing his email address. So that's one example. In the same vein as that, here we have, and sorry, that doesn't render very well, and you can watch this on YouTube yourself. So this is the legal director for Microsoft in the French Senate a few months ago. I think it was June timeframe, 10th of June, I think it was, saying that they cannot guarantee digital sovereignty in France. Okay? Even though Microsoft obviously had been, and I don't mean to make this anti-Microsoft, and I'll come back on that in a moment, even though Microsoft had said, yeah, come to Azure, it's a sovereign solution, the data resides in your country, assuming you enable that. Now they're saying, no, it can't be, because all of this data is subject to US legislation. I'll skip over that. So, and that wasn't new. A year ago in Scotland, Police Scotland took Microsoft to court because they'd said this is sovereign, this data, this policing data, this obviously very sensitive policing data, will reside inside the UK. And Police Scotland took Microsoft to court over this, and then Microsoft had to admit that actually, no, they can't guarantee that because the way that the actual cloud is implemented and replicates, and also, of course, because of US legislation. So lots of examples here. These are all from the last few months, actually, where we've seen Denmark really trying to determine to push out Microsoft as a provider, move to LibreOffice, which is like an Office 365, but an open source version of that. We've seen, and to be honest with you, I could put 3 or 4 slides together with these types of headlines on it. They're very easy to find on the register, on other sort of tech sites. Lots of activity in this space at the moment. So as a result of that, of course, Microsoft, Google, AWS, they want to protect market share. They want to do everything they possibly can to protect market share and their growth as well. So in Germany, at the end of this year, AWS will be forming or announcing, bringing to market their EU sovereign cloud. So they've formed a separate business entity under Amazon. It says there it's legally independent. It's not, because it's part of Amazon, so it's not legally independent. But they've guaranteed some elements here. So it'll establish an independent advisory board. If you read the details on this article, all those members will be Amazon employees. So it's not really independent. No critical dependence on non-EU infrastructure. That's great. That's not a problem. Its own dedicated Amazon Route 53. Not sure why having a dedicated DNS actually helps sovereignty at all, but okay. Dedicated a certificate authority and dedicated operations within the EU as well. So you can see here, Amazon has spent billions on bringing this to market, an EU sovereign cloud, but in reality, it makes very, very little difference. Yes, you can guarantee data sovereignty. Yes, you can guarantee operations are within the control of the EU, employees, etc. But that's not really around jurisdictional control, and that doesn't give you authority over the data. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. So start off, I had a Union Jack here, but I really am confused about what the rules are now about showing a Union Jack publicly. Yeah. So this morning I updated the slides and I took out the Union Jack with a French flag in because I don't know what the world's coming to, but I didn't want to be any risque and with everything that's going on at the moment. So imagine France. Microsoft comes along, builds a really lovely new data center, spends a few $1 billion, really, really outstanding, and then a businessman comes along and puts their top secret, super secret data on that infrastructure. So here we have Alan Sugar. Now, I had Alan Sugar because I had a Union Jack here. When I took the Union Jack off and put the French flag on, I Googled French entrepreneurs, and it turns out they're all in jail. Okay, so I couldn't find a French entrepreneur that wasn't in jail. So I'm leaving Alan Sugar. We all know who he is because he's well known. Satya Nadella representing Microsoft. Emmanuel Macron representing the French government. If he's able to do that anymore, I don't really know. And then Donald Trump representing the US government. Okay, so who has authority over that data? Hands up. Do you think it is Alan Sugar? Satya Nadella? Emmanuel Macron? No, there's no hands going up here. But Donald Trump. They all do. Yeah. The reality is, every single person here listed here has some level of authority over that data. Donald Trump can have a subpoena, or he can do a court order to access any data in France because it's residing on a US owned and operated data center, owned and operated by Microsoft and, of course, board of directors and shareholders here. So yes, Alan Sugar has his authority over this data, but so does everyone else as well. And that's the real challenge here, is this authority over data. So what AWS, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, are doing is conflating data residency with data sovereignty. Data residency is easy. You make sure the data is located in the UK, in France, wherever it might be. That is easy. It's a bit more challenging with metadata and account data, because most public clouds, account data is stored centrally in one region. In Amazon, for example, it's in Virginia. All the billing, account information, all happens in Virginia. But data residency is simple. So it depends on what your requirements are. But true data sovereignty means authority over that data, that no one can come along from an external jurisdiction and access that data. Okay. And these are the legislations. I'll put the first three up at the moment and the last one in a second. Cloud Act 2018, excuse me, a little bit of a cold. Cloud Act 2018, this came about because in 2016, Microsoft had a subpoena to have access mailbox data on an Azure site that was located in Dublin. So the users had mailbox data was in Dublin. An American subpoena requested data for that, and Microsoft said no. That American subpoena does not have jurisdiction in Dublin. So Donald Trump, on his first go at being president, he amended that and basically updated it so that those subpoenas, those legal requirements within the US applied to any data center that was owned and operated by a US entity. Prism is slightly different. This was Snowden leaked this many, many years ago. And this is basically all the data that comes from these large, big tech companies all feeds through the NSA. Different issue, but it gets raised quite a lot as well. Finally, here from a US perspective at least, FISA 702. This sounds initially like it's the same as the Cloud Act. Any US citizen, US organization is compelled to give data up, no matter where it resides, inside the US or outside the US. The difference with FISA is a FISA court is behind closed doors. So this is reasonably transparent. This happens behind closed doors, and nobody knows it's happening. Okay, and intelligence gathering. This isn't new. Obviously, a lot of things happen behind closed doors that we don't hear about or know about. But more people are concerned about FISA than the Cloud Act. Finally, just to balance things off with the US, China has very, very similar legislation. So when you're talking about Transcend or AliCloud or Huawei, the same rules apply from China perspective as well. They have similar legislation that forces Chinese businesses to hand over data should it be in the national Chinese interest of the Chinese National Party. So just finally, I mentioned about the Cloud Act being a bit more transparent. And this is public information. You can download these spreadsheets from Microsoft directly here. This is last year, 2024. They received 27,242 requests from data from law authorities inside the US, okay, for requests across the globe. And you can see all the different locations, regions, countries down here, the number of requests, the number of people that were impacted by that request, because these are usually individuals. This isn't banking data from a particular company, or it's not from different organizations. 93%, I think that's the right figure, 93% of these requests are for individuals' data. So their mailbox data, their Xbox data, and personal data. And then it goes on to talk about how much data was disclosed, and obviously in some cases there was no data to disclose either. But the Cloud Act itself is reasonably transparent unless there is a part of the subpoena that says it needs to be kept secret. FISA is always secret. So, any questions? I've been talking for a long time. Is it clear? Was everyone aware of jurisdictional control over data being a factor around Europe? Cool. It's getting a lot more press now. Cool. So, when you're talking about data, the next obvious conversation that you have to start is AI. Okay, because obviously AI is built on data. You can't have AI, particularly the way we're doing AI at the moment with large language models and foundational models, without data. So this is really in its infancy. So I can't say that word. This is really, really infant, a new concept here. But obviously the same rules apply. Do we want 3 or 4 large US organizations dominating the AI market for the next 20, 30 years? So this idea of building models locally, building models in different regions, and having different approaches to these models that make it maybe easy to consume is gaining a lot of traction. But this is still new. So what we need here, let me just build this out because I haven't got my clicker. So public AI models, we're all going to be familiar with those. Those are the Geminis, the ChatGPTs, where you go onto the web browser, you click and you say, tell me about something I don't know anything about so I can pretend to be smarter than I really am. So we're all pretty much familiar with those. Sovereign AI self-determined solutions. This is really the PAFE solution, the VMware Private AI Foundation solution, where you take someone else's large language model. That might be Meta, it might be IBM, it could be anything you download of Hugging Face, and it's normally very specific to your requirements. And then you actually you do inference on that, and you actually add additional data to that with a range of different techniques. Okay, but it's a predetermined model that you are adding additional data in, typically through RAG. That's the approach here, but that's going to be more about agentic AI, I think, in the future as well. And then you have a truly sovereign solution where you build your own model. And until a few months ago, almost, we thought that building your own large language model was, 10,000 GPUs, a couple of $100 million in data center costs. But the reality is that's probably not going to be the case and not going to be true because, we now see that we can build models on models, where we can pull data from different models and actually really tune our models based on pre-existing data, which actually requires far less compute capabilities. But these are the 3 different areas that this is concerning: the completely open public models, these, if you like, private models built on pre-existing data, and then building everything yourself from scratch. And so, and these are really the key elements around sovereignty when we're talking about AI model. So independence of individual providers, we've seen why that could be important about being overly dependent on a small number, particularly US providers, or maybe even Chinese providers in the future. The consideration of the legal framework, we've got the EU Cloud Act that's being phased in at the moment, really challenging to try and understand a lot of that because of the way it's been phased in with different requirements. A lot of people think that this is going to have a negative effect on innovation in the EU. Compliance with data protection and transparency obligations, self-determined selection of models, we've talked about that. Avoidance of copyright, that is a big issue. Lots of court cases going on currently. I write quite a lot and from a books and articles perspective, and if I type something into ChatGPT, sometimes I see myself being quoted there. Okay, I've happened multiple times. So copyright is a factor for anyone who really produces any material themselves. And then no unwanted use of data for trainer models, public models particularly. And that's it. So when it comes to the sovereign AI platform, we've got, from a VMware VCF perspective, we've got our Cloud Foundation, which of course is free. It's not free, obviously, but is now bundled with our VCF subscription. But we also see lots of customers, and I work mainly with partners who work with the customers, who are still just building their own stuff as well. Predictive AI has not gone away, okay? I know everyone's focused on generative AI at the moment, but a lot of large organizations really rely on pre-existing predictive AI capabilities that they're using day in, day out to build out their business and report on their business as well. So, where is this important? Of course, government, intelligence, defense, most public sector elements. In most parts of public sector, data must reside within the UK. The best example of that is healthcare, okay, NHS in the UK. And as far as I'm aware, pretty much any healthcare system in the world. I'm working with some German providers at the moment who are doing exactly the same thing. Healthcare data is considered, obviously, personal data and is required in almost every country to reside within the jurisdictional boundaries of that country. Financial services as well. Financial services, of course, is global, pan-European as well. So a little bit more challenging from a banking perspective. But if you're collecting data in a particular region, normally has to be stored in that region when it comes to banking. There is a big bank, one of the main banks in Dubai, who are currently moving. They also operate in Egypt, and they're having to move a lot of the stuff out of Azure at the moment because Azure don't operate in Egypt, and they're having to build infrastructure in Egypt on VCF as it happens to bring Egyptian customer data into Egypt, because in Egypt there's a law that says banking data must reside within Egypt. So they've had to move data back into Egypt. Critical national infrastructure, a lot of our CRI is being moved. Certainly things like National Grid and stuff like that are moving more and more on-prem as well as we speak, in fact. Secret projects. This is a fusion reactor. I went to visit one in Oxford last year. Very, very interesting. But everything was stored on that site. If you're not familiar with it, it's we're doing some really important research around fusion in the UK that pretty much nobody knows about. But all of that proprietary data and all of that research stored on that site because of its nature. It's incredibly, potentially could be hugely valuable. And of course, every time we take a photo with our phones, and I left my phone over there, we take photos of our family, our friends, our sandwiches, whatever it is we're eating and putting on Facebook. But where is that data residing? Should we care? It's a good, and this is an open question. How much should we care about where our family pictures are stored? Yeah, certainly not in the UK. When you're using iCloud, it's not in the UK. It might be in Ireland, or it might be in the US, or it might be in some other region potentially as well. But to what extent should we care about our personal information and where it's stored? So sovereignty as well, and this is a really important point. It's not just the short-term factor here around where data resides and what the requirements are. If you're able to build capabilities in country, it builds jobs, it builds innovation, it builds growth, economic growth of that country. At the moment, when you're consuming, foreign clouds or foreign services, the vast majority of that revenue, that innovation, the skills happen overseas. And of course, there's a huge benefit in having that happen either in the UK, in France, Germany, for your particular growth of that economy. So it is broader than just about data. It is also about the growth of regional economies as well. The next little topic I want to talk about really is around hybrid. I'm just going to touch on this a little bit, so I'll just put this up first. So today, most organizations think of hybrid cloud like this. So if I got sovereignty requirements and I got my private data center, and most of you here probably have private infrastructure running VMware software, you have that private, but we also consume some cloud, some public cloud, and that's not going to change. The reality is that's not going to change. I'll talk a little bit about repatriation in a moment, but most organizations will have a balance of these two elements, public cloud, private cloud. And depending on their requirements, that balance will be different. But when it comes to true sovereign hybridity, this is really the only model you're going to be able to deliver. Okay? So you have your on-premise infrastructure, but you extend into a regional private sovereign cloud infrastructure that can extend and create this hybrid model. And of course, you can extend that to the edge, and somebody just click again. You can extend that to the edge. So within the green boundaries here of sovereignty, we've got multiple sites, we've got edge, where we can have complete control, complete transparency, complete authority over data, no external authority over the data can influence what's going on inside my sovereign hybrid cloud. I'm not going to drain this slide. This is basically why VCF is the best solution for sovereign cloud. We have partners and customers in every single country in the world running VMware platforms, providing digital sovereignty of those solutions. There are more than 300 government clouds globally running on VMware. So, we've been doing this a long time. Really, we've been doing it 20 or so years, and we've got partners who've been doing it for 15 to 20 years as well. What's changing, of course, is the ecosystem around it, the geopolitical changes around it, the legislation and laws around it are changing, but actually the core principles of delivering a service within your region, with all the operations within your region, that's not new. And mentioning repatriation, and if you were here yesterday, Joe mentioned this, and a few other people have mentioned this. We did quite a lot of research. With the launch of VCF 9, we put these papers out there called, I think it was called Private Cloud Reset or something it was called. So if you looked through those numbers, and some of them were mentioned on stage yesterday and today, one of them within there is about repatriation. So 69% of the 1,800 or so senior IT decision makers said that they intend to do either are considering repatriation or have already done that. And when you look at the reason why, the highest number, 51%, is security compliance. So that includes sovereignty around compliance. Okay? So it is happening. This is strategic repatriation. So let me just move on to the next slide. Most companies are not lift and shifting everything out of AWS or Azure and moving it back on-prem. I've come across one or two organizations that are doing that, but it's not the norm. Most are taking particular workloads that maybe either from a compliance perspective, even a cost perspective, or other reasons, it just makes more sense to run them in a private data center. And that might be on-prem, it might be in Colo, it might be in a cage somewhere in Equinix. It doesn't really matter. Okay? They're taking back that control. So these are what I'm calling sort of quiet repatriation. It's not headline news. It's not changing the world. There's just individual decisions being made on certain applications, certain workloads to bring those back in on-prem. There is, this aggressive exit here, this aggressive element, but it's much, much smaller, much, much smaller. So repatriation is strategic lever. We've talked about this. I think I've covered all of those points. Statistics suggest it's increasing. And whether or not we believe it, it'll probably continue to increase over time. There is this shift now around trust and transparency, and we want to see more control over our own infrastructure. That does not mean that we stop using VMware. We don't stop using AWS or we stop using Google Cloud. It doesn't mean that. It just means we have to think more carefully about what applications run in what location and what is the best location for that application. When you run applications across multiple locations as well, it becomes even more of a challenge. And then just to finalize, I think this is almost my last slide. So, sovereign cloud, we've talked about that. The real meaning of sovereign is control. So when you see other vendors, we've mentioned some of them already today, announcing sovereign clouds, Azure, AWS, Google have all done this. They're absolutely able to offer data residency as part of that sovereign cloud, and maybe even operational control. But they're all still subject. They're all still business entities out of the US and are subject to US law as a result of that. In some cases, we shouldn't care. In many organizations, maybe it's not important. The benefits we get from public cloud are more important than the authority over the data. But for other organizations, particularly in the public sector, it is a key consideration and becoming a growing consideration as well. So I mentioned earlier on, my primary role at Broadcom, VMware Broadcom, is that I look after our partner ecosystem. We've got, I won't give you the exact number because the number is changing almost on a daily basis, but we've got a large number of partners across the globe delivering VCF services. We have currently 74, maybe 76 sovereign cloud partners amongst them. Okay, Hosken sees this as a real differentiator for us, particularly when competing with public cloud in tenders in the public sector. I'm off to Sydney in the middle of October to do 2 days talking about this. We're doing an event in Frankfurt in November the 14th, I think, talking about this. Broadcom is investing and trying to spread the word, if you like, about the importance of sovereignty and the growing importance of sovereignty. So there's lots of partners on there who could potentially help you if you were looking for some help around this. There's about 7 or 8 of them in the UK. Okay. Any questions? We've got a few minutes left. If there's any questions.
You name check some of those UK systems?
Yes. ANS, Red-Centric, Node 4. IT options based out of Belfast, but they're mainly financial services driven. Anyone else in Red-Centric? I think there is another one as well in the UK. Node 4. Sorry? Sopra is Nordics, technically speaking. Okay, so all of our, to be a sort of VMware sovereign cloud, there is no compromise on the sovereignty and the jurisdiction control element of it. Okay, so we just mentioned Sopra Steria, which is there, but they're actually a sovereign cloud in the Nordics, not in the UK. Okay, because they operate mostly out of the Nordics from an operational perspective. Any other thoughts, questions, feedback? I think these slides turn up on the web page, don't they? PDF of them? I don't know. Feel free, if you need a PDF of these, just ping me on LinkedIn, and I'll share it on LinkedIn with you. No problem at all. Cool. All right, if no more questions, that's absolutely fantastic. Have a great VMUG. This is the first one I've been at for about 3 years, and it was great. Yesterday, everyone here yesterday for the Explore? Really impressive, wasn't it? I wasn't, just in the room, I wasn't sure how well it would work, but they were targeting 750 attendees. They closed registrations at 840 because the hotel had a cap for space, and apparently we could have doubled that. When you consider that there were 3,500 attendees in Las Vegas, that's really impressive. Okay, so I hope these will continue. I'm going to the one in Sydney, going to the one in Paris, going to the one in Frankfurt. I'm not going to Tokyo, unfortunately, because I love Tokyo. But yeah, I think this is the model we'll see probably in the US as well going forward. Okay, I didn't say that, but probably in the US going forward as well. This smaller events in multiple regions, which I think have worked. This one has worked really, really well. Not perfect, but really, really well. Thank you.